I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Michael Lustgarten, who earned his PhD in Physiology from the University of Texas Health Center at San Antonio and has been studying aging in both animal models and older adult humans for the past 15 years. In addition to his academic work, he's the creator of the YouTube channel Conquer Aging or Die Trying, where he rigorously details his personal experiments aimed at optimal health and longevity. Today, we'll get into his objectives, data-driven testing, tracking, and innovation-based approach to life extension and longevity, which attempts to slow aging and disease risk by discovering the diet, supplement, exercise, and sleep recipes that can push systemic biochemistry towards youth and health and keep it there indefinitely. So I want to start out with a disclaimer. Our discussion today is about ongoing scientific research. We are not providing any form of medical advice, and it is also important to remind viewers to consult their doctor before starting any supplements, beginning an exercise routine, or undertaking lifestyle changes. I want to reinforce that disclaimer for everyone. So, Michael, welcome, sir. It is truly a pleasure to have you with me today.
No, Tim, the honor is mine. I'm a big fan of your channel. You've had some giants in many different fields that I've watched all the videos. Kevin Knuth, Matthew Sisdakis, Jack Sarfati, and even some in the longevity space. So I'm honored that I'm here today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, the focus of what I've been trying to do is thoughtful conversations, and I'm trying to share people's visions, right, of the future, of what could be. And so you are definitely pushing the boundaries of that, and that's why it's so exciting to have you. So again, today we are talking about life extension research, and your LinkedIn bio bills you as your favorite biohacker's favorite biohacker. When I read that, I said, you know what, I gotta put that in there somewhere. So let me ask how you got into this, as well as the community of people who are involved with biohacking, because I know this is something that is out there. It's kind of under the radar. It just doesn't get a lot of press or attention, but there are a lot of people who are involved with this. So can you give me kind of a brief overview of modern biohacking?
Yeah, so just real quick on the, I'm your favorite biohacker's favorite biohacker. I don't know how serious I am about that. I was just being a little bit cheeky, drama sells, and I try to stay away from drama, but I've been in this space for a while, and I just figured it was time to step it up a little bit with the sarcasm. But there may be some truth to it. All right. So in terms of how I got started with this, I basically grew up on the bodybuilder magazines as a teenager, and seeing big buff dudes and fit women and loving every bit of it. So being in, gym culture and going to the gym, having a gym membership since I was a teenager, I've always been interested in optimal health and fitness. And it was a shock to me that, these bodybuilders that I grew up paying attention to as a teenager, they started to die in their 70s, 80s, and even early to mid 90s. I mean, Jack LaLanne was a huge influence. I mean, granted, I probably lost some of your crowd, the younger crowd, but, he was a fitness icon, eat real food and exercise. And for the longest time, when watching his stuff, I had the idea, there's got to be a higher level. What's the higher level beyond eat real food and exercise? And that's a great approach for someone who's eating a standard Western diet, filled with ultra processed food. But what's the higher level? So I started to read authors like Roy Walford, Dr. Roy Walford, who was a famous calorie restriction researcher. He studied Biosphere 2, where people basically were involuntarily CR for about 2 years. And he published a book called Beyond the 120-Year Diet, which I happened to pick up. And after I did that, I was like, this is what I want to do. So I went back to school, got another undergraduate degree, went to graduate school, and the rest is somewhat history. But in his book, he was talking about, basically calorie restriction being the gold standard for lifespan extension in a variety of animal species, which is still pretty much true 20, 25 years later. But he touched on biomarkers, this idea of, what does the biochemistry of youth look like, and how is CR helping to impart a more youthful biochemical profile as a part of the longevity strategy? So in addition to that thought, I started to have an interest in metabolomics, all of the circulating metabolites that are in blood, because he only touched on a few biomarkers, but there are many other biomarkers that we can look at in terms of kidney and liver and immune, as many as physically possible. And if we know what that looks like in youth, can we play with our diet, supplement if necessary, give us a precise exercise prescription, how many hours of sleep? Can we titrate the dose to really push our biochemistry towards youth and to keep it there indefinitely? So that's my approach. It differs from the majority of the longevity space, which is, this compound extends lifespan in sedentary mice in a cage, and I'm going to take it based on the hope without any human randomized controlled trials, or even if there are human randomized controlled trials, these are generally very small studies, which then reduces back down to what does the data show in your own blood test data, which again goes to my idea of testing, tracking, intervention. So one reason I started the YouTube channel was to document my journey and to show that we don't have to wait for studies in other people, or to even see what works in animal models. We can try to figure out our own recipe, our own driver's manual that can potentially optimize our health and lifespan.
Yeah, so you're closing the loop, right? And I'm just kind of putting that out there for the audience. But, as you mentioned, there are lots of people out there taking supplements, doing health routines, switching things up, in the hopes of extending health and longevity. And a lot of that is their own anecdotal experience. They're like, okay, I tried this supplement and it makes me feel better. I've changed my diet like that, and and I think I look better. But they don't have any kind of objective data. And so one of the things that makes your work so exciting is you are kind of self-guinea pigging, right? But at the same time, you are also testing. And so you're doing blood tests, you're doing epigenetic testing, you've done DNA testing, you're looking at organ function. That's something that I've seen on your YouTube channel. So you're really digging in there, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as you mentioned, it's testing, analyzing with just using basic statistics, just simple correlations, and then intervention based on what the correlations show. So for some people who go to, when I first started, it was test one time per year and then log it into an Excel file and then see where the reference range is, and then think, all right, well, I want to move it to the middle of the range, and not even knowing how any of these biomarkers look like in youth or health, and just aiming for the middle of the range. So then I started testing more often, because once per year isn't going to be enough. Is one measurement out of 365 days, is that an accurate representation of where you are for that year? So I started testing more often just to get a sense of, okay, this is my 2022 data, 7 tests. I can take an average. 7 tests probably isn't as good as 365 days testing every day, but society isn't there yet. Eventually we'll have this stuff in our houses. So then in addition to that, I needed more specificity for potentially what could move the needle. So I've been tracking diet since 2015 in conjunction with this test, 6 to 7 to even 8 times per year. So now for every blood test, I have a corresponding diet or even supplement if I do choose to supplement, which is the least of my approach. At most, I take 3 supplements: vitamin D, levothyroxine, which is a prescription, which I don't know, technically I shouldn't include that as a prescription, or and like methyl B12, and occasionally nicotinic acid for NAD. So that's only 4, but it's based on demonstrated need. So for every blood test, there's a corresponding dietary intake, an average intake, or corresponding supplement intake. And with enough testing, I can look at correlations. And then after I get the correlations, okay, I've got 10 variables that may be significant at a p-value less than 0.05. And then for the people who are in advanced stats, they'll say, well, why don't you adjust for multiple comparisons? Because 5 out of 100 will be false positives. If I do that, I may be throwing away potentially real correlations. So if I have 10 correlations, I try to follow all 10. But then it goes a bit further, because I don't want to just try to optimize one biomarker. Can I optimize that one biomarker and not mess up the rest, or will it make the net effect, better rather than worse? Because I do have data where I'll have one biomarker that's better as a result of a given, list of correlations. But if I try to improve that, it'll mess up a whole bunch of other ones. So I'm not trying to do that. Yeah. It's finding the lowest, the bottom of the U-shaped curve. So it's test, analyze, correlations, intervene, retest, a continual process, a continual iterative process of testing the correlations and tweaking the diet, trying to find the optimal dose for keeping the biomarkers as youthful as possible.
Okay, okay. Well, so I want to remind people again about our medical disclaimer, and I'm going to put out there like here's one example why. I have another one in a few moments, but so Americans currently spend up to 50 billion a year on supplements, and Harvard Health has written that most of this money is being wasted on vitamins and minerals that people already get from their diet. And again, this takes us back to your work, and this goes to the intensive self-testing that you're doing, right? So you're measuring these blood levels of key biomarkers, and then you're balancing these through supplements. And the thing that interested me was you said a moment ago, you're only taking 3 or 4 supplements, and one of them you're not taking even all the time, right?
Yeah, nicotinic acid for NAD. That's just twice a week right now. And I have a whole video series on trying to raise NAD without taking these NAD precursors that are, popular, NMN, NR, nicotinic acid, niacin. So my approach is whole food first, as the what is the super physiological doses of vitamins, minerals, or any supplement. I don't know what those long-term effects are going to be. No one does,
Yeah.
unless we're simulating it with some AI-based program, which doesn't exist yet, right? So for me, it's the, do no harm, and it's, how can I optimize it as much as possible from food? I'll give you a quick example. So one of my biomarkers, homocysteine, which is related to vascular health, dementia risk, um, uh, is age expected, which to me is a dirty word, saying something's age expected rather than being biologically younger than it is. So that's one of the outliers in my data in terms of, age expected. So I see correlations in my data where I can, try to go after it. But, the obvious is people say, all right, take trimethylglycine or take folate and B12, take these supplements. I've done all of that, and my data only moves a little bit. So, it's about figuring out what can I do through diet. Can I tweak my diet? For example, you can get methyl donors that impact homocysteine from diet, which were missing in my diet prior to this. So even though my diet may lead to a relatively younger biological age or a slow epigenetic pace of aging, by measuring the multitude of biomarkers, there may be weak spots that are trying to tell me your diet can be better. You need to add a little bit of this or a little bit of that so that you can have the full spectrum of the best recipe. So,
Okay. Okay. Well, so again, I'm trying to simplify some of this for the audience because a lot of people aren't into this. So people who are into nutrition in general will read up on dietary trends and adjust that to optimize their health, right? And that's something that's very common, worldwide. People who are into supplements, and again, Americans are spending up to 50 billion a year on those. They'll read about a new herb or the fad supplement of the day. They'll buy some online and they'll take it because they've heard it's good for them. And that has its own collection of benefits and risks. And what I found is most people, even if there are benefits, they don't take it long enough for it to work, or they're not taking it correctly, the whole 9 yards. Now, in contrast, the biohackers that I know are digging into molecular biology textbooks, mapping biological pathways, and researching experimental compounds, which are chemicals that aren't even drugs yet, and most of them never will be, as well as looking at biological precursors. So do you think it'd be fair to say that biohacking is basically just taking all of this to kind of a whole nother level?
yeah, definitely. The only caveat I would add there is I find that most in the quote unquote biohacking space will only focus on a small aspect of systemic health. For example, glucose and lipids, metabolic health. And then they'll ignore almost everything else, kidney function, liver function. I mean, the fact is you could have good metabolic health, and even though that will probably minimize risk of having adverse health somewhere else, you could have altered immune cells and poor liver function. So it's important to look at everything. So in terms of the supplements, if someone's going to take any supplement, I'd recommend testing. Like, don't just take it based on the hope that it's going to do something magical for you. And don't just rely on subjectively, I feel great. What's the net effect on a full panel of biomarkers of as many organ systems as possible? In some cases, it may not be positive. For example, rapamycin extends lifespan in mice, and it's a pretty consistent effect. Some people think that's the best intervention because calorie restriction can be hard for most people to eat less calories. So you just take a pill, maybe you live longer. But I've had people reach out to me that'll say, look, this is my data on rapamycin. And I'll say, that's not youthful data, and I'll just say that, and then they can decide if they want to keep taking it or not. So if their lymphocytes, for example, are 1,000, which is pretty close to what you'd expect in an 80-year-old versus 2,000, which is what you'd find in a 20-year-old, something's off there. So with my approach, it's test, test. What does the data show? Is the net effect a positive, neutral, or detrimental? And then course correct based on that information.
Well, so in terms of matching your diet, your supplements, and all these things to the biomarkers, one of the things that I wanted to ask was, is there the possibility that you were just masking underlying decline, I guess?
So then the question would be, where would that manifest, right? So in addition to the, blood-based biomarkers and other standard things like blood pressure, lung function, like spirometry, you blow into a spirometer, it's a measure of how strong your lungs are. I measure strength and mobility, flexibility, all the fitness stuff too. So I've got it's basically from a top or bottom up approach. In other words, how's my physiological function cognitively and physically? And then my workouts are standardized in terms of I do the same exact routine for 90 minutes, about 90 minutes, twice a week. I've done that for years. How many sets, how many reps, with small increases in, how many reps per movement, with the goal of getting stronger, because if you're not trying to get stronger, your aging is going to take over and it's just inevitable decline. So if there's an effect physiologically, I will see it in the workouts or feel it cognitively. All right. So we start from the top, right? Now, if we work down, now you've got cells and proteins. You've got the big parts, right? And so we can monitor that to see how does that look in terms of youth. But then taking it even a step further, now I look at metabolites, metabolomics, taking it even deeper than that, looking at the molecular level, epigenetics. So I'm trying to optimize every step along that physiological process so that any potential weak spots are minimized. Now, to your point, maybe I'm just masking or missing something.
Yeah.
That's one reason why I document everything on YouTube. I'm not so egotistical to think I have it all figured out. I think this is the lowest risk approach. It's objectively driven. It's data driven. There are things in my diet that I'll see and I'm like, all right, maybe I have to take it out. I like it, but I have to take it out. I try to be, agnostic in terms of the choices that I make. If I do miss something and something gets me, because I'm documenting the journey, people could say, all right, maybe he missed this. We need to add that in. And then if I don't conquer aging and die trying at some point, if I don't live long enough to live forever, then someone hopefully will pick up the torch, or people will pick up the torch and improve upon where I failed. So, yep.
Well, actually, this is a perfect segue into your YouTube channel. So Conquer Aging or Die Trying, I'm going to put links to all of your show info basically into the notes, right, in my YouTube. So you have a library of videos describing personal life extension experiments. I've gone through it. You have a ton of material. And, as you've touched on in various ways, you're going into measuring biomarkers, you're going into the various testing, you're going into how you have adjusted your own diet and supplements and things like that. You're also going into a lot of the biochemical pathways. You're going into a lot of these detailed, biochemistry changes that you're making and organ function as well. So you have a ton of material on your YouTube channel.
Yeah. So along those lines too, you mentioned diet, like based on epidemiological studies, the hot study of the day, maybe you eat eggs, maybe you don't eat eggs, how many servings of fruits and vegetables. So I'm an outlier when it comes to that data. Like even just using dietary fiber as an example, most people don't get just the recommended 20 to 30 grams per day. And then there's published epidemiological data, large studies, like thousands of people, where up to 50 grams per day is associated with lowest risk of death for all causes. So my average fiber intake right now, or for the past couple of years, and again, I weigh all my food, this isn't just a random number, is about 85 to 90 grams per day. So how would I know if that is the amount I should be taking in relative to the published large epidemiological studies? So I'm an outlier, right? So a big part of the approach is, we've got the RDA, which is based as the prevention of disease, but going back to the Jack LaLanne, eat real food and exercise, how would we know what's optimal in terms of how much protein, how much fiber, fat, omega-3, et cetera? And by looking at these objective biomarkers, one can get towards the diet that may be best for them at the individual level. I don't presume that it's going to be my diet. I work with people who have a variety of intakes that are not necessarily how I do it. Some of them start off as, I want to replicate your diet. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be, So it's about figuring out that individual prescription, using the published studies as a guide, as a starting point. But eventually, what does your data look like? And what portions of the diet equalizer can we manipulate to keep your biochemistry as youthful as possible?
Well, you mentioned Jack LaLanne a couple of times. So in my case, I've been lifting off and on most of the time since I was 15 years old, right, in one form or another. So exercise has been a part of it. And I have spent great periods of time as a gym rat. And one of the things that I've heard in weight rooms is it's the stick-to-itiveness, right, that works. And there's this story, at least, that when older weightlifters stop lifting, basically they decline and die pretty rapidly. And so a lot of those guys will lift until they're 80, 85 years old. And they're just like, you know what? Okay, I've done enough. I'm tired. But when they stop, they go downhill and die like 6 months later. That's what I've heard, at least.
Yeah. So the only argument against that would be Jack LaLanne was probably one of the world's first, I want to live forever. Death is bad for my image. Like, he literally said things like that, So at 70, he looked great. At 80, he looked great. And then at 90, I think he got pneumonia. And then it was a very rapid decline after that. But I say it all the time. What if Jack tracked? What if he tracked his biomarkers? I mean, pneumonia is, an infection. I don't know what type he had, bacterial, viral, fungal, etc. But if he tracked his immune cells and knew that he'd be resilient if he had an infection because his immune cell levels or even the subsets of immune cells were youthful looking, maybe he'd survive better. If he ignored that for his whole life and just assumed, I've eaten real food and I've exercised, I should be fit as an ox, I'm doing 2-hour workouts. Is that the best approach? Or could he have optimized, right? So even the 2-hour workouts, I started off on this journey doing 3-hour workouts, throwing heavy stuff around like a gorilla. I've always done that. I just love throwing heavy weights around. I had to completely recraft the whole approach because it was taking me too long to recover, tired all the time, felt terrible. My sleep was terrible because I was, overtrained. So I'm not saying Jack was overtrained, in doing 2-hour workouts, but was that there is something to immunosuppression as a result of chronic overtraining. Now, I'm not trying to say bad things about Jack, but it just raises this issue of, would tracking have helped him have an even healthier lifestyle and living even longer and getting beyond 95? I think his brother died around the same, age range. And from what I've read, his brother wasn't a fitness icon and wasn't into the fitness like him. So it makes you wonder how much the fitness was even related to, getting to 95 years old in his case.
And again, that's why it's so interesting to explore and continue doing research. So we mentioned your YouTube channel. I want to ask about some of the other resources that are out there. In the past, I have visited the Longevity Forum. A few years back, I went through that with a fine-tooth comb. I've also heard people recommend the Reddit Life Extension Forum as well. Do you use those? And what are some of your other trusted sources of information?
Yeah. So the best source of information is PubMed. So if I have a hypothesis, I go looking for the papers. But I'm the odd monkey to this, right? The second is I go straight to the biochemistry and I start looking at the pathways in terms of if I want to move the needle for a given biomarker. Outside of that, in terms of what's pop culture-ish, I mean, there are a bunch of Facebook groups that are related to life extension. As you mentioned on Reddit, there's a longevity Reddit that's like 180,000 people. So that's pretty good. That'll post papers. Twitter is fantastic. Science Twitter is fantastic. I mean, I follow a whole bunch of people from different fields. Even Stuart Hameroff, I follow him, and that's completely different from what I'm doing. But that raises the whole. So I'm sure I don't know if you want to go there with this, but cryonics is a big part of the longevity mindset, right? So if Stuart Hameroff's, hypothesis and data for decades is basically that there are quantum effects in the brain, and that maybe we don't die when our physical presence dies. A part of that. I'm probably butchering his approach, but his research basically involves consciousness existed outside of the brain, and that's what drove the evolution of life. Now, along those lines, I've thought about cryonics. But what if I'm basically Han Soloing myself and preventing anything that may exist beyond what our limited senses have evolved, right? I mean, how much of the observable universe can we detect? So I'm not sold on cryonics. I'm not sold on Stewart's stuff either, but it gets to the philosophical portion of the, conquer aging or die trying. What comes after this if I die trying, right? So that's just a random thought. But so I try to follow.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump around a little bit since we're getting into the philosophical stuff. Back around Y2K, Wired Magazine wrote, the good news is that if you were born after the year 2000, you have no set life expectancy. If you were born before then, you already know the bad news. So to me, this is a deceptively simple statement. Should we be welcoming the first generation of immortal humans to the world? And should we be teaching them traditional values for aging and death that no longer apply?
I wish I could say that all of that was true. No animal species has been made immortal by intervention yet. I'm not so naive to say the singularity is coming in 5 years, maybe the technological singularity, and I'm a big Ray Kurzweil fan. I've read his books, big fan, but I don't think it's coming in 5 years, this immortality, and I don't think so. Is it going to be 50 years? So the rate of aging is pretty much a constant. You can speed that up with poor diet and poor lifestyle, and you could potentially slow it down. Can you flatten it like I'm hoping to do? We'll see. But the how much we know relative to that slope, where are we? Are we flat? We know very little relative to that slope of aging, which is a relative constant, or are we pretty close and just don't know it? The old image of the miner who's hacking underneath digging tunnels and doesn't realize that just a few steps away are the diamonds, but they've been digging for so long that they just give up. We don't really know where we are. And I say that because no species has been made immortal by our direct intervention. Have we extended lifespan by a little bit? 10% here and there? Have we gotten past the gold standard of calorie restriction? Not yet. No intervention has gotten past where calorie restriction has gone, not even rapamycin. So I don't want to say I'm skeptical, but that's another reason I got into this. Going back to the Ray Kurzweil and Terry Grossman approach of live long enough to live forever, I can see no other approach that beats this approach of minimizing disease risk and potentially maximizing longevity through objective data tracking and intervention, giving myself that chance in the next 70-ish years. If it doesn't come, well, I die trying and someone else, but eventually we'll get there. Nobody knows the number.
Well, and that kind of answers my question about longevity escape velocity, which I'd skipped over, but that's something that Aubrey de Grey has been well known for popularizing. I think he actually originally coined that term. And the idea is that, your life expectancy is increased by advances in medicine faster than you age, right? And so, even though you're getting older, medicine can keep you alive longer and longer and longer. And it sounds like you are not necessarily sold on that idea, at least not yet.
I am. Don't get me wrong. I am 100%. It's just that we don't know where we are. So, for example, since 1840, I think human life expectancy has increased by 2 years for every decade lived, leading to an almost doubling of life expectancy over the past 180 years. So if you extrapolate that out, it'll take something like 200 years for the average lifespan around 80 to be the maximal lifespan of 120, not 200 years, So now you could say our technological singularity will go from increasing 2 years for every decade to now it's every decade you get a decade. There's just no evidence that that's true yet. I want that to be true. Eventually that will be true, assuming humanity doesn't extinguish itself with stupidity or war or whatever it may be, eventually we'll get there, right? So are we there yet? I don't think we're close. I want that to be the case. I desperately want that to be the case where, like longevity escape velocity is exactly equal to that slope of aging. And now there's no more aging. I desperately want that to be the case. And I'm a big fan of Aubrey too, don't get me wrong. But even in the experiments that he's doing, where he's doing lifespan curves and various interventions, these lifespans are not double or triple. Now, there are animal models where lifespan has been up to 5x. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Michael Rose at UC Irvine, who's used experimental evolution basically you start off with a founder stock of Drosophila, and then you let the long-lived flies breed to the long-lived flies, and the short-lived ones breed to the short-lived ones. And after something like 2,000 generations, the long-lived flies, remember, they started from the same founder population. The long-lived flies that were led to bred to each other with each other for 2,000 generations, which is a long time in human years, extended lifespan by 5x. So there is that potential, right? But you'd have to have it perfectly titrated in people, where only people who have longevity genetics could do that for the next 2,000 generations. I mean, do the math times 25 years, right? So it's coming. I just don't know when longevity escape velocity, will be here.
Well, and so, one more time here, I want to go back to my no medical advice disclaimer. And the reason why in this case is a really surprising example for me. So for years, people have thought that extending telomeres in cells would avoid the Hayflick limit and overcome cellular senescence, right? Because when the telomeres shrink past a certain point, cellular reproduction ceases and cells, as I understand things, begin to go senescent. So I recently interviewed Dr. Aubrey de Grey, and he suggested the opposite, that longer telomeres may increase cancer risk, which is something that's been well known as a possibility, but he also said that they may not benefit longevity. So what are your thoughts on telomeres? I wanted to ask that first. And also, is it fair to say that we're going to see reversals on a lot of this science over time? And that should be a reason that people shouldn't necessarily commit to a lot of these, fads that come and go, I guess.
All right. So for the latter question, please don't let me forget, because I want to go through the telomeres first. So there are two things going on with that statement that Aubrey made, both of which may be true. First, the idea that longer telomeres may increase cancer risk. There is published data that shows that longer telomeres may indeed be a part of that story. But we're talking about like outlier level telomere length levels, not what you'd expect to find in youth. So for example, in youth, telomere length levels are somewhere around 7.75 kilobases. And then they decline during aging. It's a hallmark of aging that telomere length declines. So in my case, I'm not trying to go beyond physiological levels of telomeres. My goal is to restore my telomere length levels to what you'd expect to find in youth, 7.75, and not go any further beyond that. Now, in terms of telomere length being a good marker of biological age, there are other measures that seem to be better. When it's compared in biological age clocks, it doesn't do as well as some of the epigenetic or even blood-based biomarker, other blood-based biomarker assessments of quote-unquote biological age. But knowing that telomere length does decline during aging, and it can involve cellular function, because if you get to the point where they're too short, and as you mentioned, the replication limit, right now you've got cells that may have issues with replication and cell division and all this stuff. I don't want my telomeres to decline during aging. So keeping them at youthful levels, again, not through supplements if I can, is a part of the approach. So both of what he said has some truth in it. In terms of your latter question, what was that third question? It was
well, science reversals, and again,
right.
For me, that goes back to, and I've done this myself, right? It's you see something new come out, and it's the latest and greatest. This is going to cure X, Y, and Z. It's going to make you twice as strong, twice as fast, the whole 9 yards. Everybody goes out and starts supplementing with it, and then 5 years later, somebody comes out and says, "Oh, you know what? Either no, it doesn't work, or oh my God, it turns out this thing works worse than doing nothing at all." So.
Yeah. So in terms of the science behind that, I think it's a beginning field. So there are scientists who are looking at epigenetic reprogramming, which basically goes towards this idea of age reversal. So I don't claim to reverse aging or reverse biological age. That's not at all what I'm claiming. All I'm claiming that I'm trying to do with some success is slowing my rate of aging. That's the best I can do. It's going to happen. Like I said, there is that constant, but I'm just trying to slow it. Now, in terms of the epigenetic reprogramming as a means for reversing aging, for example, blindness, reversing it by adding these factors that can lead to cellular rejuvenation, it's just that field has just basically been birthed. And unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of different scientists, not just one or two lab groups, to really dive in and try to sort this out to get it to work, if it actually will work or not. Now, the good news is there are people like Brian Johnson who aren't waiting for academia to do the studies on this and are diving in headfirst and trying a whole bunch of different things. Now, you could debate, okay, he's doing it and maybe it's not safe and he's his own, N of one and his own guinea pig, but that there are people who are attempting to do these things. If there are enough of us crazy enough, without harming, because there are people in this space who have died trying crazy stuff, I'm not trying to go to that level. I'm trying to keep it, as low as risk. But if a bunch of us do try these interventions that could potentially rejuvenate cells, potentially we get there faster. It doesn't have to be an academia only process and we wait for that, which may take who knows how long. There may be things we can try, but I just keep an eye on the field for now. I wouldn't dive in, because there would be safety concerns. It even goes to the idea of, like cloning and CRISPR and, manipulating the genetics. Even Dolly, Dolly the sheep with the whole cloning like 20-ish years ago, those issues had to get sorted out. And I think some of the sheep died. So I'd be very skeptical with the quote unquote age reversal, especially in terms of the safety.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of telomeres, what comes to mind for me is Dr. Liz Parrish, right? Where she got so excited about it that she locked it in with the genetically engineered retrovirus. And I did an interview with her a couple of years ago. Now, in her case, it looks like her health has improved considerably. She also did some adjustments, I believe, to her muscle function. And the measurements over time, I think over like a 7 or 8 year period, show a marked improvement over baseline, I guess. And so that brings up another aspect of this as well, is that what you're learning about in terms of supplementation and biomarkers today, there is the potential in the future to be able to lock some of this in, right, with genetic engineering.
Yeah, and then it becomes how often you have to go in for that maintenance, right? I know in Aubrey's books, he said, periodically you'd go in and get your dose and, you'd be rejuvenated for X amount of time. I don't know that it's that simple. I don't know that one therapy can solve all of the body's ills. Now, stem cells, maybe that's a promising area where, they can go to any cell type in the body where needed. And maybe that could help with rejuvenation where you're getting regular stem cell injections. You pull them out from your own body, you grow them in a dish, and then you put them back in. But the field isn't, it is being done, but it's, very rarely, people on the extremes for now, there just isn't enough, properly controlled studies, even by the people doing it. For example, and I'm a big fan of Liz, but, I think she lost weight and changed her diet during that whole, I don't remember the exact intervention that she did, but it was something like myostatin inhibition, where she was trying to, but she changed her diet. And so there may have been other factors. And then, to really prove it, you'd have to basically do that therapy 10 times and not do it 10 times and then compare the data, right? So I don't know that once or twice really proves it. Now, that being said, in my case, I'm not trying to prove any points. This is what the biochemistry of youth looks like. What's my recipe to get there? And if the recipe got me there, I don't know which of the factors are causing it or not. All I can say is the overall approach may be a part of that, recipe for more youthful biomarkers. Trying to prove these things at the individual level could take several lifetimes, and having some ill health along the way because you've got to prove it, off and on, which may worsen your health during that period if it actually did work. So, my eye is on that space, but outside of stem cells, I'm not too optimistic yet.
It's interesting. Well, and what you went to about, having that single person study, I guess, because again, in terms of biohacking, right now, a lot of this is anecdotal. And so the closest that we have for a lot of these, especially these exotic supplements and research compounds, is you have anecdotal studies from a lot of different people. And so it's a one person study replicated 50 times, But going on those forums, one of the things that I've seen is people will begin taking, again, whatever that new fad research chemical is of the day, and they'll say, you know what, I had really great results. It worked really well. And then somebody else will ask, well, what else are you taking? They say, oh, well, I'm taking like 50 others. and then the next guy will say, oh yeah, well, me too. Oh, me too. Well, so then the problem becomes, okay, is it even that's
Yeah.
helping if you're taking that many supplements,
Yeah,
So,
there are people in this space that take more than 100 supplements. Exactly right. Without naming names. And I always say, how do what are they even doing? Does anything in your body work without these things, right? So I'm a root causes guy. I want to have the ship working as good as possible, and then only when needed, patch the leaks because absolutely nothing else works. What happens if you're so heavily supplemented? Now, fast forward 30 years, what do you do then if the ship starts to leak again? Like, you're already taking all the supplements that are supposed to give you quote unquote optimal health. Are you just out of luck at that point? Do you just increase the dose? I mean, so
well, yeah. Now, in terms of, I wanted to ask about NAD because this came up on your YouTube channel. This is kind of one of the big ones right now. A lot of people a few years ago were trying to directly supplement that. The big one now is NMN, which Dr. David Sinclair has been promoting. And again, I saw this several times on your YouTube channel. So I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on NAD in general. Is that a key, or is this just kind of the latest fad?
So I wouldn't say it's a fad because it's required for mitochondrial function. And if you have suboptimal mitochondrial function, you'll have suboptimal energy production, suboptimal cellular function, then extrapolate that all the way up to the whole organism level. So yeah, I've tested NAD 15 times. I've used NMN, I've used niacin. I've tried to optimize it through diet. So far, not successful. It declines during aging, so it's important. How important though? I don't know. What are optimal levels? Should it be above a certain number? Still also unknown. There aren't very large epidemiological studies in contrast with more well-studied things like glucose. I can get a study of 10 million people on how glucose changes during aging. But for NAD, it's very small studies. And it consistently, though, it declines during aging. So my focus on NAD is how can I optimize diet to prevent any age-related decline while playing around with the precursors like NMN. So one reason I went after NMN, besides it's being so expensive, and second, because it's being banned or it was going to get banned in the United States, or it was going to be paywalled as a prescription only, where you have to get a prescription from your doctor. So I started tinkering around with nicotinic acid, which is one of the niacin forms, far cheaper. And I found that I was able to increase NAD at a far lower dose relative to NMN. So I've got a few videos on the channel about that. And now nicotinic acid, niacin, is a regular part of my approach, knowing that it can impact NAD. So part of it, I went after NAD to debunk some of the NMN, and NMN is the best, or nicotinamide riboside, NR. But then the other side of it, seeing my own NAD levels were relatively low in age expected, how can I optimize that? What am I missing in my diet, and then what could I add into it? Now, that said, even with the nicotinic acid, how much? At what dose? At what NAD level am I aiming for? So I found that I tried a higher dose, 600 milligrams per day, and that actually may have messed around with my epigenetic speed of aging, in part through LDL. But I have the video on my channel for anybody who's interested in that. But so using my approach and testing so often, it's getting towards, what is the optimal niacin dose to have NAD be at a level where I'm not messing up other biomarkers while still keeping it relatively high and youthful to gain any potential benefits. I don't notice an effect on energy or any of my biomarkers changing with my NAD being age expected and not relatively youthful. So I don't want to say I'm skeptical about how important it is. It's important. It's just, what's the absolute value that's most important? Should it be 60 micromolar? Is 40 micromolar okay? So on my personal journey, I'm trying to figure that dose out too.
Interesting. There is so much here, and it is changing so rapidly. Well, Michael, let me thank you so much for your time today. Truly a pleasure having you with me, and I would love to have you back. As time goes by, we can discuss more of, like how things are going for you, as well as, the latest fads that are out there and the whole nine yards. There is so much in this space, and it is really pushing forward right now. So let me close by asking what's coming up for you in the beginning part of this year, especially in terms of your research and self-guinea pigging in biohacking.
Yeah. So, no, thanks, Tim. The honor is all mine. there's that scene where Morpheus and Neo, and Neo's, I'm sure you've watched The Matrix, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Neo's about to leave to go to Machine City, and Morpheus and Neo shake hands, and Neo's like, "Oh, it was a great honor," and Morpheus says, "No, the honor was mine." So truly, I'm honored to be here. Happy to come back anytime. In terms of what's next, my next blood test is scheduled for the end of the month. I'm doing, the full panel, the standard chemistry profile, the things you get at a yearly physical. I do that 7 times per year. Also on that day, we're testing NAD, epigenetics, metabolomics. And then I wish I could say in 3 months, I'm going to have this conquered and figured out, but that's not how it goes. So it's stay on course, continue analyzing data, helping others that are also doing this, that are on the same path, and trying to keep the biochemistry as youthful as possible for as long as possible.
Amazing. Thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Ciao, Tim. Bye.